Hey there, and welcome back to part 2 of this workflow series. In this video, we're going to go through the process of UV unwrapping the Pokeball that we modeled in the last video. So let's dive right in. Just to give a little bit of context with the UV process, the end goal is going to be to take all these objects and lay them out flat in our UV editor, okay? Because for our texturing software, or in this case Substance Painter, for Substance Painter to be able to see our model and read it, we need to lay out this whole model flat on a 2D surface. And that's where the UV editor comes in. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up here to UV, and let's just click on UV editor. This is basically our blank canvas where we are going to lay out our UVs. So I'm going to click on the shell, and this is what we're going to take a look at first. Okay. So now that I've selected the shell, you can see I have these completely broken UVs, and this is always what's going to happen. When you model something and you go through the process, you're just completely destroying those UVs throughout the process. So if you UV something in the start and you do a bunch of modeling on it, don't expect the UVs to be same. So the first thing we want to do is come up here and start with a clean, fresh set of UVs. And for that, you can use any one of these options, but I'm going to go with the camera based. So the reason I like camera based is because it gives you a UV projection from your visible camera or from your viewport, and it does not make any seams, okay, or any cuts. I like this because I want to make all the cuts myself, and I want to be very particular about where I'm making the cuts and why I'm making them. So now that we have a fresh set of UVs, let's dive in. So if we come close to our model, and let's just put a Lambert on this so that it's less shiny and we can see exactly what's going on. Thinking about it in a nutshell, we could basically split both of these parts into two pieces, or let's first focus on just this piece. We could break this piece up into two pieces. One piece is the outer shell, okay, so this whole piece, and one piece would be the inner shell. Now, instead of calling it a piece, we could call it a UV island or a UV shell, because those are the terms in 3D. And let's get started with making some cuts. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the areas that I want to cut. And for that, let's talk about one of the places which is usually the best to make your cuts. So if you have a two-segmented bevel like I have in this case, or like most models will have, what you'll see is when you press 3 and go into your smooth preview, both the edges or both the edge loops on the outside jump a little bit. So the inner one jumps quite a lot, and the outer one not so much, but it still moves. So the best edge loop to cut or to make your seams on is always going to be the middle one, especially if you have a two-segmented bevel. Okay, so right here I'm just going to select the middle edge loop, and this is going to be the best one to cut. Now, rather than going and selecting this one and then selecting this one and then selecting the others, I am just going to use the same thing we saw in the last modeling video, which is selection switching. So I'm just going to go control. I selected this whole face loop. I'm going to go control, right click, two edges to edge parameter, and I'm just going to deselect that outer edge loop. And now I have successfully selected the whole edge loop that goes all around the object. Now we're going to come back here and hold shift, right click, and this activates our another awesome UV marking menu. So shift right click is one of the best modeling marking menus as well, and I think it's one of the best UV marking menus as well. So shift right click in our UV editor is going to bring up this, and while I have my edges selected, I'm just going to go cut. Okay, and the moment I do that, we're going to see a white line drawn on our object. And now if I go right click and I go to UV shell, I can select both these shells. So I can select the inner shell and I can select the outer shell, right? And we just cut this into 2 pieces. So what I'm going to do is select that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that inner shell and go shift right click, unfold and unfold. Okay. Now, the reason I'm unfolding it is because right now, if we turn on our UV checker, we can see that these squares are really skewed, right? This is coming from the camera-based projection. So if I want to actually unfold this and let Maya or let the texturing software see my UVs, I need my squares to be very even, and that's when I know that my unfold is correct. So with the outside, I'm just going to go shift right click, unfold, unfold. And now I have the outer shell, I have the inner shell. Let's just go and quickly accomplish the same for the bottom as well. So let's isolate this. Let's go to our face mode and select this face loop. Control right click to edges to edge perimeter. Deselect this edge loop, cut this from here. And now again, we have the outside, and I'm just going to hit G to repeat the last command and do another unfold. And now we have the inside as well. Let's move these aside. I don't really care that they're overlapping at the moment. We just want to first get all our UVs done, and then we'll come back. So now that we have those UVs, you can see that there's a little bit of skewing towards the corners. It's not something that I'm super bothered about, but if you want it to be, especially for this project, but if you want it to be a little more specific, what you could even do with the outer shells is you could come in and make cuts here. So we could cut that there and cut this here and unfold it, and we would get a little less stretching on those corners. But with this project, for the type of texturing that we want to do, I don't think it matters at all. So I'm just going to sew those back and take it back to where it was. The next thing we got to do is this inner black portion, right? So for this, again, I think the easiest way to unwrap this is going to be first UV camera based. Let's just turn off the checkers, and I think the cleanest cut we can make in this is down the center on the side. So if I cut, let's just do a cut, and now that I have that cut, basically this is going to unwrap into the front shell and the back shell. So let's just go to our UV shells again, unfold that, G to unfold this as well. And now if we take a look at the checkers, these ones are pretty square as well. Now, right here, if you click on this button, you can see now you can see that our squares are not completely square in certain areas, and normally there's always going to be some amount of distortion in your UVs. Okay, I think it's pretty much impossible to get absolutely no distortion in your UVs, but you need to be smart about it, right? You're okay with getting distortion in areas that are not very visible, and the areas that are visible are the ones where you don't want to have much distortion and you want to hide your cuts as well, right? So if I was to, instead of making this cut at the side, I made this cut down the center, this would not probably be very good, because then I was going to see the seam all throughout my textures. Okay, so whenever I look at this Pokeball, I'm always going to see that seam, right? But because I made the seam here, I just see it for this very, very small area, and that's what is going to be the best way to go. So you always want to try to hide your seams as much as possible. Let's come into the ring around the Pokeball, and let's just go through the same process again. So we're going to go camera based, select that middle edge loop, cut it, and we'll select this inner edge loop as well and cut this as well. Also, the last thing I'm gonna do is change a little bit of how we've modeled the center. I'm just gonna select these edges, extrude them inward, just to get some buffer space on the outside. And now we have this UVs as well. Let's just unfold that, and G to unfold this as well. And we have the back. We're never gonna see the back, but let's just have them in the UVs as well. So I have all of this done. Let's go ahead, and now we get to do the button itself. The button is going to be super simple as well. I'm just going to go camera based, select this edge loop, cut it, and unfold it. Okay, so we have the back and we have the front. And now I think what you might say is like, isn't it good practice to cut things according to their planes? And what I mean by this is like anything that's facing front you would have as one shell. Anything that's facing towards the top or the sides you would have as a separate shell. So by that theory, we would probably make a cut here, and we would have this as the front and this as the outside, and probably cut this into a ring, something like that, right? But this does not make a lot of sense to me, because especially in cases like this, because would I rather have a seam here and have a little less distortion, or would I have a little distortion and no visible seam here, right? And for me in this case, the answer is simple. I'm gonna pick not having a seam over that minimal distortion that would probably be happening on the outer portion of the surface. Okay, so that's why I'm making these kind of decisions with this piece. At least I'm trying to reduce seeing seams as much as possible. And this one is pretty much already done. Those are the UVs, but just to be safe, I'm gonna go camera based. We get our new set, just unfold this, and we're good to go. The last check is going to be just to turn on our checkers, select everything, and just make sure, okay, I'm seeing squares on everything. I know everything is fully unwrapped. And now let's get into actually laying this out, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna do is take all my shells, come down to arrange and layout, and I'm gonna hit orient shells. In this case, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but especially if you have straight UVs and you're trying to do some texturing that has a pattern, right? Then orient shells is going to straighten out your UVs so that any of your patterns look straight. In this case, the texturing that we're going to be doing on the Pokeball is going to be pretty organic. So it doesn't matter if our UVs are straight or not, to be honest. The next thing we want to do is I'm just going to select everything. Select all my shells, shift right click, layout, layout. What this does is it takes all your So the next thing we want to do is select all our objects, go to UV shell mode, select all the shells, and we're going to go layout, shift right click, layout, layout UV. Now what this is going to do is give me a very quick layout, put all my UV shells into the 1-to-1 space in my UTMs, and now I get a better understanding of what's going on, how many shells I have. And from here I can go ahead and start doing my own placement. But let's talk a little bit about UVs and textile density first. So each of these boxes or each of these squares is a UTM, right? Now good practice is just making sure that if I have a shell, it should not be crossing these lines. It's either in this UTM or it's in this UTM. Okay, so this would be 1, this would be UTM 2, 3, 4, and so on. So yes, you can use multiple UTMs to get more texture resolution, but your shell should never be crossing the border of one UTM tile. If you think of this 1-to-1 square as a 1K to 1K texture resolution, then I think that's the best way to think about it, because just like you have pixels in a picture, you have texels in a texture, okay? And that's where we come to textile density. If this shell is this big, then I can't have this shell being the small, because that means that this shell, the textures on this shell are going to look much more high quality than the ones here. So another thing is going to be to set our textile density so that all our shells are the same textile density. So if I select one of my shells, I can come to transform, scroll down, I can say get, and that is going to get the value of this shell. And then I can select my next shell and I say set. So this is how you can make sure that all your shells are the same size. Looking at the sizes of these shells, I think maybe we could split this texture up into multiple UDEMs. So what I'm going to do is, we have the outside and the inside for the top, so these two. So I'll take these and I'll scale them up as far as I can go, okay, while fitting them in one UDEM. So I scaled them up a little bit. Let's go get from this and let's set on this. Let's see if we can fit these in this shell as well. Okay, so usually the way I would set my textile density for any objects is that I will scale my biggest shell. In this case, this would actually be the biggest shell, but this is the most important shell because we don't see most of this anyway. So this is technically my biggest shell. I would scale this up to a good size, and then I would get, and then I would set, right? So this guarantees that any other shell, if this is my biggest one, and this is able to fit in one UDEM, that means all my other shells should also fit in those UDEMs. So now that we have our outer shell set, let's set all of this as well. Okay, let's lay this out as well. So I think this, we can lay out something like this, or let's see if they both fit on top here. Okay, and again, I want to make sure that nothing is crossing the UV borders. And with these ones, if I scroll down to distribute, I have this little distribute button here, and you can put in any number here. So let's do something like a 0.001. And if I press the side button, it's going to lay out all my shells sideways with a 0.001 space distance between them. If I do the same thing with the top, then I get something like that. So let's say I want a little more distance. Let's do that and lay these side by side. And that's looking pretty good. So I do have a lot more space on the shell, but I think it's okay. I don't mind it. Okay, and with this, we are good to go. Let's go ahead and finally just finish prepping this Pokeball so that we can send it to Substance Painter. So now the final steps to prep is going to be, first I'm gonna select all of this, and actually I think because these are the main pieces, this is just the way I like to work. I'm gonna switch these to the first UDEM, and I'm gonna send this stuff to the second UDEM. So I can just come in here to transform, and right here I have a value of 1. Okay, this means when I click side, it's gonna jump one tile or one UDEM. And I'm gonna do the same thing with the others. I'm gonna click this side, and these ones are gonna jump back to the first UDEM. And now that I have everything all set, the last thing is gonna be to go through and name this. So let's just call this outer shell. It's gonna be the inner ball. And here we have the ring. Here we have the button. And here we have the light. Now we're just going to take all of these objects, Control G to group them, and we can finally name this our Pokeball. Delete the other group. Delete our image plane as well, because I don't think we really need it. And just before we send this to Substance Painter, all I'm going to do is select my whole object, I'm gonna assign a new material. So since we're gonna be using Arnold with Maya, I'm gonna go to Arnold and I'm gonna select the AI standard surface. And this is generally the material that you wanna go with. It's the base Arnold material that you can usually plug everything into. And the way you can find this one is by looking at the icon. This is the only one that looks a little different from the others and has this A at the top. Okay, so I'm gonna click on that and I'm just gonna come here. Let's just close our UV editor. We don't need it anymore. And again, we can see making all those cuts has saved up some history here. So let's just go ahead, select our object and delete our history. And now I can just go right click, material attributes, come to my material. I'm gonna call this matte Pokeball. Okay. And with that, I think we are all set to go. And I think we are totally ready to bring this to Substance Painter. And that's pretty much it. So thanks for sticking around till the end and watching me UV unwrap this Pokeball. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts or questions in the comments. And if you do decide to model a Pokeball of your own, I'd love to see your progress. So share your work and tag me on Instagram at mesh_labs. Next up, we'll take this model through the texturing process in Substance Painter, so don't miss it. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to join me for the next step in this series. See you next time.